Think about the person you were like 10 years ago. If that specific version of you had locked in a master plan for your life, would you actually be happy living inside it today?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, I think most people would be pretty miserable.
Right. But we do this constantly. We sacrifice our present to do these favors for our future selves, just assuming we know exactly what they're going to want.
Yeah, and a stack of philosophical field notes we're looking at today suggests we might actually just be trapping them.
Exactly. So today's deep dive is into a movement known as reflective humanism. We're specifically looking at an essay titled Number 112, How Responsible Are We for Our Future Selves, alongside some of their core field notes on, well, structural observation.
And we should probably clarify right away what this text is actually trying to achieve. Because honestly, the title sounds suspiciously like a productivity seminar.
Oh yeah, it totally sounds like a life hack blog.
Right, but it's not. This is not financial advice, it's not career guidance, it's not a health lecture or some self-help life planning lesson.
No 5 tips for maximizing your retirement account here.
Exactly. They aren't doing that at all. What they are offering is a philosophical observation. It's aimed at giving you a clearer, structural way to look at your own life and really the passage of time.
Yeah, so the central question here isn't, how do we make the correct choices for our future selves? We are asking a much more mechanical question, which is how much room should the present self leave for the future self to choose again?
It's a great reframing because we say the phrase all the time, right? I should do this for my future self.
Literally all the time. You put extra money in a savings account, or you force yourself to study for an exam, you drag yourself to the gym, or maybe you just finish a really grueling work project on a Friday evening so your Monday morning is easier.
And at first glance, the logic there seems bulletproof.
Yeah.
I mean, you are the same person, so helping that future version of you out is just entirely straightforward.
But the assumption embedded in that daily behavior is that you're doing a favor for a carbon copy of yourself who just happens to live next week or, next decade.
Yeah, and the essay starts by just completely dismantling that assumption. I mean,
Yeah.
think back to that decade ago version of yourself you mentioned at the beginning. Does the person you are today hold the exact same values?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right. Do you have the same priorities or the same physical conditions? What about relationships or daily responsibilities?
For almost everyone, the answer is a flat no. Like, the things that motivated me a decade ago barely even register on my radar today. And the
Yeah.
people I spend all my time with, well, they've changed too.
Which brings us to the first core structural concept from the text. The present self and the future self are not identical.
They're not the same.
Right, but they are continuous. I mean, they share a timeline, they share a biological history, and one leads directly to the other, but they are not the same entity.
Not identical, but continuous. That is such a slight shift in phrasing, but it completely changes the mechanics of how we live day to day.
It really does.
Because if the future self isn't identical to the present self, we suddenly have to look incredibly closely at what we are actually sending forward to them.
Yeah, and we usually only think of this in terms of massive life events, right?
Right.
Who we marry, what career we pick, where we decide to buy a house.
Right, the big stuff.
But the text points out that we are passing things forward constantly. It's this stream of microtransfers. Every present choice becomes a future condition.
Like the money you spent this morning.
Exactly. Or the sleep you lost last night. A difficult conversation you decided to delay, a habit you reinforced, a promise you made. The authors actually use a specific term here, topography.
Topography, like map terrain.
Yeah. The future self doesn't just wake up with a blank slate every morning. They have to begin their choices and build their daily life on the exact terrain, the topography that the present self leaves behind. You are actively shaping the ground they have to walk on.
Okay, but wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If time is strictly asymmetrical, meaning, time only flows one way, aren't we basically acting as paternalistic guardians to our future selves?
What do you mean?
Well, if I look at this intuitively, if that future self is still ultimately me, even if my values change, why should I treat this as a responsibility problem at all? Can't I just do what I want with my own life right now?
Sure, you can.
Like if I want to eat junk food for 3 days or spend all my savings on a whim and ignore my professional responsibilities, the consequences fall on my own shoulders, don't they?
Well, the consequences fall on your shoulders, yes.
Yeah.
But the structure of the relationship is what the texts are trying to isolate.
Oh, okay.
The future self is not a total stranger to you, but because of that rigid asymmetry of time, you are effectively making decisions for an entity that cannot yet speak or respond.
Ah, I see.
The present self can impose conditions on the future self, but the future self cannot travel back in time to participate in the decision. They can't voice an objection. So consider it a structural analogy.
It's like making decisions for a dependent who can't voice their own preferences yet.
Exactly. You hold the power of action today, and they hold the entirety of the consequences tomorrow.
We hold the power, they hold the consequences. Wow, that frames everyday choices so differently. Because the future self can't speak up and advocate for what they might actually want, we really have to examine how we transfer things to them.
Yeah, and it's not just the beneficial things, like a newly learned skill or a healthy savings account.
Right. We also pass forward unprocessed burdens, unresolved problems, neglected relationships, and deferred maintenance on our own bodies.
Which actually brings us to a really fascinating nuance in the reflective humanism framework. The immediate cultural instinct when we talk about passing unresolved problems to the future is to just condemn it entirely.
Oh, for sure. We label it procrastination. We call it a failure of personal discipline.
We assume it's inherently bad. But the structural observation here is much less judgmental. I mean, procrastination or delaying a burden is not structurally wrong by default.
I've found that part of the notes incredibly interesting, actually, because it strips the moral weight completely off the act of delaying.
It really does.
Because sometimes dealing with a massive problem right now would just completely break the present self. Like, consider a major life pivot, realizing you need to entirely change your career path.
Right.
If you realize this while you're simultaneously, say, dealing with a health crisis or navigating the first chaotic year of parenthood, the present self might be completely depleted. You simply do not have the emotional bandwidth or the physical energy or even the financial runway to face a career crisis today.
And by postponing it, you aren't failing. You are intentionally sending that burden to a future self who might have actually recovered their capacity.
They might have the tools you lack right now.
Exactly. They might have a broader perspective or more resources. What the authors want us to observe is the structure of the transfer. Are you sending a problem forward because the present self is simply shifting a minor annoyance? Or are you sending it forward because dealing with it now would destroy your current capacity entirely?
So allowing the present self to survive intact is sometimes the best condition you can possibly pass forward. That really removes the guilt and replaces it with, like, mechanical observation. And that observation is crucial when we look at how we typically try to map out our lives. Because the standard life planning model we're all taught from a young age operates entirely differently.
Oh, totally.
You sit down, you look at your present values, you predict a desirable future based on those values, and then you optimize all your present actions to construct a path to get there.
Right. You tell yourself, my future self will thank me for working 80-hour weeks in my 20s so I can become a partner at this firm by 35.
Yeah. But the profound danger in that standard optimization model is the assumption that your current values are permanent.
Exactly. If you lock yourself into a rigid, highly optimized path based on exactly what you want right now, you might successfully build an absolutely perfect future for the person you are today.
But by the time you arrive at that destination,
You're no longer that person. You risk trapping the person you will be tomorrow inside a structure they just no longer desire.
you basically optimize yourself into a corner.
Yeah, and this is where the texts introduce their central hypothesis, which is option preservation.
Option preservation.
Right. If the present and future self are continuous but not identical, then taking true responsibility for your future might not mean deciding the correct future in advance. It might mean avoiding the unnecessary removal of the future self's ability to reconsider.
Okay, but where is the line between preserving their options and just refusing to commit to a life path today? Because you can't just keep every single option open forever.
No, of course not.
If you decide to go to medical school, you are closing the door on spending those years doing something else. If you get married, have children, move across the world for a job, paths close. Life fundamentally requires making decisions, and decisions eliminate options.
Yeah, you can't be paralyzed.
Right. Option preservation can't just mean freezing in place and never committing to a single thing.
And the authors readily acknowledge that. Complete reversibility does not exist. You cannot unmake a major life choice, nor should you try to live in a perpetual state of non-commitment because, well, that isn't a life.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to keep every single door propped open, option preservation means leaving the history of your choices in a visible state.
Okay, let's mechanically unpack what leaving a visible history actually looks like, because the text describes it almost like leaving records. And I was trying to picture how a person does this in practice outside of, just writing in a diary?
Well, think of it like a software engineer writing a really complex piece of code for a critical system. A good programmer doesn't just write the code and walk away.
They leave notes.
Exactly. They leave detailed notes or comments inside the code explaining why they built it that way,
Oh,
what specific problem they were trying to solve, what assumptions they were working under at the time.
I like this analogy.
So when a future programmer, which is usually just themselves 6 months later, comes back to update the system, they read those notes. And because they understand the original context and the original constraints, they can safely delete or rewrite the code without worrying they're destroying some crucial, mysterious master plan.
That is a brilliant analogy, because when the code isn't commented, the future programmer is terrified to touch it.
Right, they think, if I change this one line, the whole system might collapse.
Which translates perfectly to feeling paralyzed by our past life choices. We think, I can't quit this career path, my past self worked so hard for it, there must be a reason I'm here.
Exactly.
So leaving visible history means you don't just make a life decision, you leave a structural note explaining the context. It's not saying to your future self, I built this so you must maintain it forever. It's saying, I made this choice based on who I was and what I knew at the time. Here is the topography. Here is why the terrain looks this way.
It provides a scaffold. It gives your future self the freedom to look back and reinterpret the past. They say, that was the correct choice for who I was then, but the conditions have changed, and it is time to rewrite the code.
It respects their autonomy.
Yeah, it respects the future self's autonomy to pivot without feeling like they're betraying themselves or failing at some grand design.
And this trap of locking into current values doesn't just happen in our personal journals or, career planning. The sources scale this exact same structural observation up to the technology we are building and relying on today.
Yes, the AI aspect.
Because we are increasingly handing our data over to artificial intelligence and asking it to optimize our lives. We ask AI to map out an optimal career trajectory, design a perfect daily routine, or even curate our entire information diet.
And the warning embedded in the Reflective Humanism text is quite stark regarding that kind of algorithmic optimization. If an AI system simply optimizes your life based on your past clicks, your current inputs, and your current values, it basically functions as a device that permanently fixes your self-image into the future.
It becomes a mechanism that strictly enforces who you are today onto who you will be tomorrow.
Exactly. Effectively removing the friction and the serendipity that usually allows us to grow, encounter new ideas, or, just change our minds.
It accelerates the trap. It optimizes away the space to reconsider. Like, if the algorithm only feeds you articles based on what you believed yesterday, you are never going to encounter the information that might make you change your mind tomorrow.
Right. And the alternative proposed by the text is to utilize AI in what they term health scan mode.
Health scan mode.
Yeah. In this framework, the technology does not act as a navigator that dictates the single correct path to your destination. Instead, it acts as a transparent interface.
Let's talk about how that practically differs from an optimization algorithm. Because if I'm using an AI career planner in optimization mode, it might look at my skills, see that I'm highly proficient at data analysis, and tell me the fastest, most efficient path to becoming a chief data officer.
And it filters out everything that doesn't serve that singular, hyper-efficient goal.
Right. It might completely hide opportunities in creative fields or education because they aren't statistically optimal for that specific endpoint. So what does health scan mode do instead?
Well, in health scan mode, the system's purpose is to visualize which pathways remain open to you based on your current topography, without assuming a final destination.
So it doesn't hide anything.
No, instead of hiding the creative or educational paths, it highlights them as adjacent possibilities. It shows you, here is where you are strong, and here are 5 vastly different directions you could walk based on that strength.
That's completely different.
Yeah, it reflects your current position, highlights your biases, perhaps pointing out that you only ever select data-heavy tasks, and exposes your blind spots. It preserves the field of observation so that you, and crucially your future self, retain the agency to actually make the choices.
It visualizes the terrain instead of forcing you down a tunnel.
Yeah.
And what really struck me reading through these notes is how this principle scales even further, beyond the individual and beyond technology, all the way up to how we construct civilization itself.
Yeah, the civilizational scale.
Because it is the exact same mechanism of the present imposing on the future.
It's the temporal asymmetry applied on a macro scale. A current generation designs cities builds concrete infrastructure, passes enduring laws, and establishes complex societal systems.
And they pass all of this forward to a future generation that cannot vote today.
Exactly. The people who will live in these structures a century from now cannot speak up and say, this design doesn't work for us.
But you are doing the exact same thing to yourself. The daily habits, the physical environments you set up, and the rigid routines you're building today are the internal civic infrastructure your future self will be forced to live inside.
Yes.
And if we apply the principle of option preservation to society, the goal shouldn't necessarily be to hand the next generation a completed, perfectly finalized world. Because what we consider a perfect utopian society today might be completely impractical or even deeply harmful to people living 100 years from now under entirely different environmental or cultural conditions.
The responsibility of one generation to the next is not to hand them a finished house where all the furniture is permanently bolted to the floor. The responsibility is to hand them a society with the structural room to remake itself.
To change things around.
Right, you aim to pass on a resilient topography and infrastructure that allows for reinterpretation, redesign, and adaptation.
Which actually brings up a concept in the text that requires some careful unpacking. They call it transparent pain.
Transparent pain, yes.
They use this term to describe a very specific kind of friction. Let's look at a relatable scenario. Imagine an 18-year-old who decides they absolutely want to be a corporate lawyer. They lock in that value, they optimize their entire education around it, and they leave zero room for deviation.
Okay.
10 years later, they're 28, grinding through a law firm, miserable, burnt out, and realizing they don't actually care about corporate law anymore. But they keep pushing because they feel obligated to the master plan that 18-year-olds set in motion.
And the texts identify that quiet structural misery as transparent pain. It occurs when a rigid internal operating system, a fixed, unyielding way of viewing your life's trajectory, clashes with a reality that is inherently continuous and changing. The map hasn't changed, but the terrain has.
The map hasn't changed, but the terrain has. That is exactly it. If you sacrifice your present self entirely to build a rigid, idealized future, you destroy the foundation you actually need to get there. You force a linear, fixed path onto a continuous, evolving self, and the friction between those two realities generates that transparent pain.
Right, because if you break the present self to save the future self simply inherits a broken topography. You haven't protected them, you have severely limited their options and their capacity to navigate the world.
So if we pull all these threads together, the continuous but non-identical self, the unidirectional flow of time, the danger of permanent values, and the mechanics of preserving options, it forces a total reevaluation of what we are doing when we say, I'm doing this for my future self.
It really does.
Protecting your future isn't about passing them a finished, perfectly optimized life. It's not about handing them the correct answers. It is about passing them the conditions to remake the future themselves.
It ultimately comes down to trusting the future self. The reflective humanism movement leaves us with a question that operates more as an observation than something to be easily answered.
What's the question?
Is taking responsibility for your future self about fixing the right path now? Or is it about intentionally leaving the structural room for them to someday say, actually, I changed my mind?
Trusting them enough to let them change the code. And that observation points toward one final, really lingering thought from the sources. We've talked deeply about the paths we choose and how we leave visible records of those choices. But what happens to the paths we don't choose?
The closed doors.
Yeah. When a door closes, do those unchosen futures simply disappear into the ether? Or do they remain inside us? Do they survive as imagination, as a lingering question, as a story we tell ourselves, or as a reinterpretation that continues to shape the very topography we are leaving for tomorrow?
Well, the terrain is shaped just as much by the rivers that dried up as by the ones that still flow. In a continuous self, nothing is ever truly lost. It is simply absorbed into the landscape.
Something to observe as you go about your day. As you make your decisions, big or small, take a look at the structures you are building. What kind of topography are you leaving for your future self today?